Hello, everybody. We're welcome to another episode of Talking Hoops with Michael and Jandy. Michael McCleary, Argus Leader Sports, and Jason Andera, Midco Sports. And another fun week of high school hoops. We're kind of over the hump, about midway season. And last week on Saturday, we had a pretty unique day, Michael. We had 3 1-versus-2 battles. Something you don't see very often in high school hoops.
Yeah, I'll say it again. It's happened every single year that I've been here. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty, especially two of them being in the same location, neutral court. That's pretty cool. And like you said last week, like the people who scheduled the Hanson Classic couldn't have known a year ago that they'd be 1-2. They knew there were going to be good teams, but
they get those once in a while, but it's not every year.
Yeah, they killed it with the scheduling this year. They got the two best teams in Class A and B going up against each other, and then elsewhere had at O'Gorman High School had O'Gorman and Roosevelt going up against each other, which obviously they had one of the thrillers of the season and the season opener. I believe for season opener for O'Gorman, Roosevelt played I think Jefferson the week before, or a couple days before. But yeah, I mean it was fun Saturday.
Yeah, I was at the O'Gorman Roosevelt game, and that game stayed fairly close throughout most of the game. O'Gorman actually had a lead in the first half for a little while, but this Roosevelt team, man, they just continue to impress. They are such good players on defense, and they do a good job of spreading the wealth. I mean, it was Marcus Phillips who had the big first half for them, but so many good players that can hit a big shot when they needed it. And then O'Gorman, they relied on Matt Eng to hit some big shots, and you've mentioned him before, and he did it again where he just went through a little stage where he wasn't going to miss a shot. So that was a lot of fun to talk to. And actually, I had a chance to talk to Mitch Begeman right after the game, and here's a little bit of what he had to say.
Our defense is our MO. That's who we are, and anybody that knows that. And it creates our offense. But our kids battled their tails off, and I give Matthew Eng credit. He did not get an easy look all night, and he knocked a lot of shots in for him. But our kids battled, and that was a great game, great atmosphere.
Yeah, defense got it done for Roosevelt. They stayed number one at the head of the polls. Interesting, pretty much the same top 5, except Jefferson moved into the top 5. Anything strike you in this top 5 for AA?
Yeah, I mean, Jefferson's a good one to start off with because they've been pretty much underrated for a large part of the year. Obviously, playing a AA schedule, first year of the school, these teammates are all new. Like, there was going to be a little bit of a learning curve, but man, like, they're really good. They got some really, really good players on that all throughout the roster. So, I mean, I was really impressed with Harrisburg. I got to see that Jefferson-Harrisburg game. I believe it was last Friday. And I was really impressed with Harrisburg and, what they were able to do. And that was a really close game. But towards the end of the game, Talon Ashley was just unbelievable. And, we've talked about some of the other players that Jefferson had. That was really – that was a game where, Talon showed that he could, step up and lead a team at the end of the game. But they got a ton of other players. I've mentioned Bo Giblin before. He's not someone who puts up a ton of stats, but I mean, he's got to be one of the most special passers that I've seen. Just looking throughout the state with basketball this year, it's really so impressive what he could do with the point guard spot, and when he's handling the ball. So they just got a really versatile team, and I really like their roster. But Mitchell, Washington, Harrisburg right on the outside, and Lincoln, Aberdeen Central. Like, these are just a bunch of really good teams, like Class A stacked.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun to see how this, AA pans out over the next couple of weeks. I think Jefferson is that team on the rise. I think there's a lot of teams right around 500 that, have a chance to get better in the second half. Brandon Valley's a team who's been under the radar big time with a rough start, but they're now over 500. There's some teams that could cause some fun games here in the second half of the season in AA. That's for sure. Let's move to Class A now, and we'll start at the top. The 1-versus-2 battle. Just watching St. Thomas More and Dakota Valley go at it. it felt like those were the two best teams, especially defensively, that I've seen in Class A. There's a lot of teams that can score, which is Sioux Valley and T, just the game before them play, and they can move it up and down the court. But it felt like St. Thomas More and Dakota Valley defensively really took it to another level.
Yeah, well, the final score I believe was like 48-46, or
40s, yeah.
something within 2 points, very low scoring. So defense definitely showed in that game, and I thought that Dakota Valley had a pretty strong hold of the lead for a decent portion of the game, but then as the game started going, as the game started going on a little bit. St. Thomas More just started making sort of a little bit of a small comeback, and Dakota Valley just started missing their shots. So that was a close game by final score, but I really did think Dakota Valley had a pretty strong control of it, and that's saying something when they only put 48 points on the board. That defense has to be pretty good.
Yeah, I was impressed with the no quit in St. Thomas More, but I agree. I think Dakota Valley felt like the better team on that night. They felt like the better team throughout most of that game. We talked to Jason Kleiss after the game, both of us did, and he mentioned about how they were kind of settling for shots in the fourth quarter, and that's what made the game so close.
First of all, they picked up their defensive intensity and really pressured us. And I thought the only thing I told our guys I was disappointed with was we didn't execute down the stretch. We were in the double bonus almost the whole fourth quarter, and I thought we could have grounded out and really attacked the rim a lot more than we did. We settled for jump shots, and that's how they all almost came back and got it done. So, different styles a bit. We like to run and gun, and it's hard to do that against them because they're really sticky, disciplined, well coached, and they got a lot of good players. They really have a lot of guys that know how to play, and so it's tough to get loose against them. I thought our guys did a good job executing most of the game, but saw a bunch of things we got to work on for sure, which is great.
So in Boys A, not a lot of changes here either. The only change, Flandreau moves into the rankings. They were getting votes for several weeks, but still just one loss for this Flandreau team. And St. Thomas More stays at number 2 despite the loss. And Sioux Valley and T trade spots because Sioux Valley got the win against them at the Hanson Classic. Any thoughts about Boys A for you, Michael?
Yeah, I'm torn on these rankings actually because it's good to see Flandreau, obviously having such a great season. Get some votes in the top 5, finally get in there. But for T area to fall out of the top 5 after that loss to Sioux Valley, that's disappointing because T area is really, really good team, and I think there's a lot of really special players throughout that team. But Sioux Valley was really, really impressive in that head-to-head matchup. Obviously, Oliver Vincent towards the end of the game just started hitting his 3-pointers, and he's one of the better players in Class A. So Sioux Valley deserves their spot. Yeah.
T's field goal percentage in the second half just went away. Part of that is just they had tough time shooting, and part of that is Sioux Valley, made some adjustments and was able to defend. But you're right. I think T's a team that we're going to still be talking about for the next few weeks for sure.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about boys Class B. No movement in the rankings whatsoever. We had 1 versus 2 again. Let's talk a little bit more about that game between Smet and White River. God, it had a big game feel to it in that first half. They showed out.
Yeah, Joe Saylor hitting that 3-pointer at the buzzer. I didn't even see where it was from. It must have been like right before the half-court line. But yeah, that was a big-time shot. And once that shot fell, I was like, man, this is going to be a crazy game. But Smet, to their credit, they pulled away. They didn't necessarily, let White River take the momentum after that huge play. They had the lead, so, they were going to keep it. Damon Wilkinson had an unbelievable game down low. He was missing a few shots early, and he talked to him after the game. He said it was just sort of a mental thing. So, after Kalen Gary tried to dunk it on the fast break and Wilkinson grabbed the rebound and slammed it home, there goes your mental game. That's a huge boost for him. So, he was playing really, really well in the second half, ended up having 27 points. And towards the end of the game, Kalen Gary took over too. So when those two guys are clicking, it's really, really hard to beat them. So you can't blame White River, but Joe Saylor had an unbelievable game as well.
Yeah, I look at these teams, and neither of them rotate a ton of players. They pretty much stay with their main five most of the game. It was interesting to see Rhett Ostis defend Joe Saylor, and Saylor got his 30 points, but he struggled shooting for parts of the game, and he was on fire for other parts of the game. So that was interesting to see just how they would match up if we'd ever get to see Kaylin Gary against Saylor. Didn't see that very often. And for me, the real difference in the game was Damon Wilkinson, because Gary would throw punches, Saylor would throw punches back, but couldn't throw punches back whenever Wilkinson got hot. In that third quarter, he was one guy that White River just didn't have an answer for. So it'll be really tough for anybody to beat Smet in Class B. That was my big takeaway from the game.
Yeah, I agree. And the funny thing, you mentioned the Kaylin Gary Joe Saylor matchup. There was a part early in the game where I believe it was Kaylin, as Joe was taking a layup at the rim, blocked him off the backboard, and it was like, ooh, okay, this is going to be a battle. But then it really, Joe had an unbelievable first half, and Kaylin was a little bit quieter. But that was just because Damon Wilkinson was having such a big game. But towards the end of the game, Kaylin started to catch fire a little bit, and Joe on the points battle, 30-24, ended up beating Kaylin. But when you have a teammate that's scoring 27, you can't really quite blame him for not getting the 30. So
yeah, really, you look at it, and I've watched a lot of players this year. No doubt that Joe Saylor and Kaylin Gary belong in the conversation with the best players in the state right now. So and then Damon Wilkinson, what he's done, he's been on a tear lately. I think he's starting to really feel like a threat as well as one of the top players in the state. So pretty good for Smet to have two of those guys playing at that level. And then, like I said, Rhett Ostis doesn't get the attention, but he does all the work on defense. So that Smet crew is really impressive. Let's move to girls basketball if you're ready, Michael. Let's go to girls AA. We've got all these one-loss teams. They start playing each other this week as Stevens plays Central in a rematch, and then next week Brandon Valley gets in on some of those Rapid City games. Things could get a little interesting, but right now you got those top five teams with one loss. And then after that, is there another team that, maybe could catch fire in the second half that it really does? I mean, that's a lot of good one-loss teams, but is there somebody else we're not talking about?
Oh, man. It's tough. There's, obviously Watertown and Jefferson, Lincoln, all of those teams are sort of like right outside of it, but it's really tough when you got a 4-loss team, the next closest team to 5 1-loss teams. I mean, it's hard not to look at it as a 5-team race at this point.
I agree.
But it's still early in the season technically. I believe we just passed the midpoint, so a lot can change in these last couple of games. Obviously, Brandon Valley and some of the teams that are 3, 4, 5. They could start losing some games, and Watertown or Jefferson could go on a tear. There's a lot of possibilities for the rest of the season, but right now it seems like those 5 have a stronghold on those spots.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, out of those next tier of teams, Jefferson, Watertown, Lincoln, the only team that has a win against one of those top 5 teams is Watertown, and they won on their home court against Brandon Valley, where Brandon Valley was not at their full strength. But Jada Young, Kendall Paulson, Maddie Rohde, Jade Lund, they've got some players for Watertown. I feel like they're still a step behind in it. And I think Jefferson too, they have some players, but they feel like they're still a step behind. And then Lincoln had a test the last 2 games against some top teams, and they were kind of starting to ramp up a little bit, but then those 2 games, they weren't even close against some of those top competitors. So I think we're talking about those top 5 teams. And a little later in the show, we're going to talk to Stevens head coach Adam Dannenbring, and he'll help us break down a little bit of Class AA as well. Let's talk about girls A. We had Hamlin take on Roncalli. They played in the A championship game last year. Of course, Ron Colley's moved now to Class B. They haven't lost a game yet this year. And I think Hamlin put their hat in the ring as a real contender. Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, and their team that's flown under the radar, kind of surprisingly, because they have a similar roster from the team that made it all the way to the championship game last year. And they just beat the team that they lost to in the championship last year. So it's it's a really, really good team. And they've we were talking about it before the show a little bit. They took 2 early losses. And I feel like that sort of kept them out a little bit, but they've been dominant in some games throughout the year. And, that's not something you typically see from a team that at this point is 4 spots outside of the rankings based on at least last week's vote. So, I'm looking at some of the other teams, Lakota Tech, Parkston, Red Cloud. I mean, these are really good teams too, but Hamlin, obviously has proven that they could get far in the Class A tournament with a similar roster last year. And, they're kind of on the outside looking in. So I think they're going to be rising quite a bit in the next couple of weeks. But, throughout Class A, I mean, there's just a ton of really, really good teams. I mean, we got a 1-loss team in the 4 spot. So
that's the problem is like, you might think that Hamlin's a top 5 team, but who do you bump out of the top 5? Because they all seem worthy as well. And that's why I haven't voted for Hamlin, even though I believe they're, if they play a game against any of those Class A top schools, they'll be right in it. And you mentioned it. I mean, Ron Colley came back with their entire roster basically from last year's championship team. And Hamlin had, Cammie Wadsworth, one of their top players from last year back, and Allie Abraham. And they've really added some pieces to that to make them a real contender this year. And it was close throughout the game. And in the end, Hamlin pulled away. And I think that's going to wake up some people in Class A that I agree. There's about 8 or 9 teams I feel like that could cause some havoc here in the State A tournament. And that's what happened last year. Ron Colley came in. They were not a favorite coming into the tournament, and they came out of nowhere. I think Hamlin could do the same thing they did last year and cause that same type of problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm looking at the top 4, Wagner, West Central, Flandreau, Dakota Valley. I can't tell you who's the best team of that group. I mean, obviously Wagner's in the number 1 spot. They had that big win over who did they beat in the Hanson Classic last week?
Yeah, they came out and played really well against West Central, who had just come off that real tough part of their schedule. And that definitely, when you beat the number 2 team like that, it's gonna give you some confidence. But you're right, on a given night, who knows? Yeah,
and that we talked about this a little bit last week. Obviously, it was super, like the scores were very far apart in that game in particular. But you never know. It could just be an off night for West Central. West Central came back and won some big games against some good opponents after that. So I mean, it could have just been an off night. I don't think those teams are really too far apart. But at the same time, I mean, Wagner, West Central, Flandreau, Dakota Valley, it's. I cannot tell you if there's a championship favorite at this point. And I don't think there is.
No, there's a lot of work to do still for all those teams. And Girls B kind of opens up a little bit once you have Ron Colley with that loss. Corsica Stickney's only losses came to, I believe, to Class A teams. I'm going to double check that to make sure that, they lost to Dakota Valley and then they lost to Wagner. So they lost 2 games to A teams, haven't lost in the class yet. There's a lot of teams in Class B that could cause some havoc. And you got Smet up there who's, had that one huge loss, but I feel like they're in the mix. Aberdeen Christian just 1 loss. White River just with the 2 losses. And I think the Class B opens up quite a bit as Ron Colley takes that loss.
Yeah, and I'm really high on Corsica Stickney. I got to see them at the Hanson Classic last week against Flandreau, and they played really, really well. I mean, on the inside, they're just dominant. So I'm really, really high on their prospect for the rest of the season. And obviously, with Ron Colley taking a loss, there's a chance they might be in that number 1 spot next week. But you never know. Voting is sometimes varies. So
yeah, Yeah, both them and Roncalli, have lost to Class A teams, and it's hard to compare and contrast. But you're right; those are definitely the two teams we're talking about at the top right now. Let's continue the conversation. We have a guest coach this week. It's Adam Dannenbring, former boys basketball assistant coach at Stevens. Before that, he coached girls basketball at Stanley County. And in his first year at Stevens, has him off to a pretty good start. Let's talk to him about his Stevens Raiders. Adam Dannenbring with us, talking hoops. And Class AA has been so interesting because you've got all these teams with one loss, and we're not sure how those teams play against each other because there haven't been that many games. You guys have a fun game coming up against Rapid City Central, and that's going to go a long way to kind of seeing, who some of the top teams are and maybe what some of the weaknesses are. How are you guys feeling halfway into the season with just one loss?
Obviously, we're feeling pretty good about the whole season so far. It's been a really fun ride, and then when we play Central, the Central Stevens rivalry is a special one, and I'm looking forward to it. It's always a great atmosphere, and when we play over at Central, we always do the White Out for Cancer game. And so, everyone's wearing white, and it's a pretty cool reminder that, this is a basketball game, but there's also, people that are struggling, and it's nice that we, use the money from the fundraiser from selling the t-shirts that goes to someone who's fighting cancer in the community. The kids, they get fired up for this one, and I think coaches do as well. It's always a fun game.
What's your assessment? You came over from the boys' side as an assistant into girls AA with all these really good teams at the top. And what's your assessment of Class AA this year and the competitiveness?
I'm really happy that we're one of the top ones for sure. In AA basketball, I think that, even if you have an off night, if you don't bring your game, a lot of the teams can beat you, so it's not like it's a huge step down to some of the other teams, so it's, we just try to do our best every day to keep getting better. You've heard that cliche a million times, but we really do, we just try to get better every day at practice, and then, keep playing well. We've been playing really well, through our last few games, and we're starting to really move the basketball offensively pretty well. But now we'll see, our next 3 games we're playing against, Rapid City Central, then we'll have O'Gorman, and then we'll have Brandon Valley. So we'll see. And when you play against great teams, you're gonna, find out things that you need to improve for sure.
Yeah, that's a big test coming up. Still plenty of time to peak toward the end of the year, but that'll be a good test for you guys. Let's talk about how you guys have played since Bailey's come back, and how that's maybe changed what you do offensively and defensively.
So since she's come back, we've kind of limited her minutes a little bit. So she isn't a full go quite yet on that knee, and some days are better than others for her, it just depends. I think we just kind of take it day by day and see how she's feeling. I think, once she gets out there and she starts playing, the competitive spirit comes out, and then, I think the adrenaline and getting going, then the pain level in that knee kind of subsides a little bit for her, and then she's playing. It's great to have her back. We did a great job. The rest of the team did a great job of just stepping up and playing well in her absence. And now that she's back, it helps to complete our team because she's very good both inside and outside. For people that maybe aren't as familiar with Stevens and what you guys do well, tell us about the strengths of this team. We are, we're very aggressive, full court man-to-man, and, full court trapping defense. And then, we transition pretty well back into a pretty solid half court defense as well. Offensively, we really look to push the basketball up the floor. It's basically exactly, I've had teams in the past where we really wanted a fast break and push it up the floor. And, sometimes you just can't do that because your personnel, well, that's not the case here at Stevens. We have some very good athletes that are very good at running up the floor. And, I inherited this. It wasn't something that I just brought into, this team. This is something that they did well already. And I've just tried to, keep up, keep doing what they were doing before and, try to enhance it as I could. I got to give, like, defensively, I give just a ton of credit to our assistant coaches. Like, they're on top of things. Travis Schwartz, Tanner Waggy, Quintrell Porter and Sherry Kafka. Like, they work on the scouting reports, and they during the games they're out yelling whatever needs to be yelled at, and they take care of a lot of that stuff on the defensive end, so I give them a ton of credit.
And as we kind of enter go time here in the second half of the season, what is it you need to shore up just to be at that championship level?
Like, there's always things that you try to, improve on. I'd like to see us take care of the basketball better against pressure. I think that, Watertown did a very good job last time that when we played them last Friday, just pressuring us and forcing us into some silly mistakes. I think we played better the next day against Brookings that way. I also think that we need to continue to rebound well. I mean, that's been our strength all season, but you can always, there's always good reminders, and especially against some of the teams we're going to be playing that are really tall and athletic here coming up. So we're going to have to make sure that we're rebounding well, win that rebounding battle. And then, of course, like, we got to keep shooting the basketball in practice because, at the end of the game, it's the score. They look at the score. So if we can get the ball to go in the basket, like, that's helpful.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Adam. This has been a lot of fun, and good luck on this tough stretch coming up.
Yeah, appreciate you. With all you do with all the sports coverage, it's cool.
There's Adam Dannenbring. They got a big game coming up against Central. Their only loss this year to Central. It was a home game. This time they hit the road across town to play at Central's place, and that could be an interesting game. And that leads off our talk of big games coming up. That one's Friday night, and really, it's always going to be a rivalry game. But Alan Bertram has Central playing really well right now. The last time they played, we talked about it. It really felt like Central had the command most of the game, and then Stevens came back and made it really close at the end. And now I feel with Bailey Sobchak back, even in limited role, it might change the scope of this game. Anyway, we're really looking forward to a good game in AA basketball. Let's take a look at some of the other big games coming up. We got Roosevelt at Washington coming up Friday. That should be a battle. Washington continues to move up the ranks. Roosevelt still undefeated, and this could be one of their biggest tests here for the rest of the season.
Yeah, obviously Roosevelt has, in their two opportunities against probably their best competitor, has been able to weather the storm. Obviously that O'Gorman game was pretty close, but they still ended up winning pretty handily. But Washington's got some goods. McKelly Camballo, he could get hot from the outside, and obviously he's a fantastic scorer. So whenever you got somebody like that, they got some size too. So
and I believe Acott, one of their players who's had an MCL injury most of the year, is due to come back fairly soon. I haven't heard for sure, but I think maybe even this week he'll be back. I'll have to double check on that. But that really adds another weapon for Washington, and that's going to be a really interesting game.
Yeah, it's disappointing he's missed so much of the season, because that when he comes back, that makes them a contender. And you definitely want towards the end of the season, you want them to be playing their best basketball, and as he starts to get back into it, you want to play in those big games. So I think it would be interesting to see. It's obviously been interesting to see how Washington played shorthanded this year. But once Acott comes back, they are, I think they're a team that can contend with a lot of those upper teams. But we just haven't seen that yet. But that Roosevelt game will still be good, I would imagine.
Yeah, I can't wait to see that one. Saturday, we've got the DAC-12 NEC clash, where they literally just seed 1 through 8. From the NAC side, and seed 1 through 8 on the DAC-12 side, and they match them up and they play them in Madison. In the last two games, the twos, Lennox taking on Groton. Groton has not lost yet this year, but they haven't beaten a team over 500. Lennox, on the other hand, I think one of those sneaky under the radar teams in Class A that could be really good. And then the 1-versus-1 game is Lakota Tech taking on Dakota Valley. Honestly, I don't think that one's as close as the Lennox Groton game, but two decent battles that we'll see in Madison on Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Dakota Valley is looking to bounce back a little bit after that Hanson Classic outing, just because towards the end of that game, they just weren't really hitting their shots very well. They went a little bit cold. I think they thought that they could have played a little bit better in that fourth quarter. So, but yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting matchup for sure.
And next Tuesday night's always a great night for basketball. Make sure to check out Jefferson at Mitchell. Jefferson won 4 out of their last 5 games. Mitchell still at number 3 in the rankings. Of course, they're always a dangerous team. This will be a tough one in the Corn Palace. Kind of a nice top 5 battle to look forward to on Tuesday.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then another Tuesday game. You know, Flanders ranked, Del Rapids is not, but it's going to be a fun game because Flandreau, they need a tough test here, and Del Rapids, I think, will provide that. So another one of those games to look forward to on Tuesday. Some of the big games coming up over the next 7 days here in South Dakota High School hoops. What are you working on, Michael? What are you going to be covering here in the next week?
Well, tomorrow, Lincoln plays Washington at Sioux Falls Lincoln High School, I believe. So that will be a great game. Obviously, Washington I'm getting some votes in that top 5, and Lincoln's been right sort of around there too.
They need a signature win.
Yeah, I mean yeah, exactly. That's the one thing they're missing at this point. But I mean, it's hard to deny their roster. Just they got a ton of really, really good players on that team, and I think in terms of just the way that the teams are set up, just where they stand at the season, these are really 2 very equally matched teams. So that'll be a really, really fun matchup. Yeah,
and we don't have any live games on Midco Sports this week. The week following, though, we'll have Brandon Valley and Washington playing in boys hoops. So I'm going to be doing some prep for that and checking out some of these other big games coming up, and really looking forward to that Stevens Central girls basketball game on Friday night. I'll be tuning in to that one. That's all we've got for this week. Michael, we did it again. We'll be back next week to talk more hoops.